Hey, Good Sam, this is Pastor Jed. It was great to be together on Sunday as we gathered for worship, as we lift up our voices, as we prayed prayers, as we looked at scripture together, as we gathered around the communion table. On Sunday, we were reminded of the epic story of David and Goliath. You got it. This is such a famous story. You don't have to be a Christian. You don't have to go to church to know this story. You don't have to have the scripture memorized to know this story. It's so familiar in our culture because it's this unlikely battle between a shepherd boy and a giant. The shepherd boy, he has 5 smooth stones. He has a sling. He has a stick, a rod. And this giant is all armored up. He has a javelin. He has chain mail. This giant has a javelin. This giant has a shield. This giant has been undefeated. He is head and shoulders above everyone else. And yet, it's a battle that belongs to the Lord. The thing that we love about David is we learn that God sees things very differently than the way I see them, the way that you see them. That's why David was chosen, because David had a heart after God's own heart. We see that God's vision for this battle is also very different, because God's not impressed that Goliath is huge, that Goliath has a sword or chainmail or a shield. All he's looking for is David to step forward with everything that God has provided. And so David takes this stone, he puts it in the sling, he begins to rotate it, he aims at Goliath's forehead, and he hits the giant square between the eyes. Then he chops off his head, and God's people are victorious. But what do we learn? What we learn is that we all face giants, and facing a giant, it's scary business. It's lonely business. It builds our confidence in God because we can't rely on our own strength, on our own strategy. It also teaches us to depend on the things that God has given us. We don't need to put on other people's armor. We just need to trust in what God is doing in our lives and the resource that God is giving us. We also need to step onto the battlefield. And as David steps onto the battlefield, there's been a lot of questions, and some of those questions have been answered about Goliath, because this giant isn't undefeatable. There's a very good chance that this giant can't see, that he has a benign tumor that's sitting on his pituitary gland. So he can't see David lining up with his slingshot. He's just looking as this rock comes to end his life. I think about the giants that I faced, and I think about the giants that you face. We think that they're huge. We think that they're unsurmountable. We think that they're undefeatable. But God gives us exactly what we need to stand and to be true, to rely on God's strength, and to rely on God's provision, and to rely on God's people. Speaking of all that, we're going to be gathering again for Wednesday Night Live, and if you haven't had the chance to jump in, I want to encourage you to come. This Wednesday, 5:30 to 7:30, we're going to feed you, we'll clean up, and then we'll break into small groups, and we'll just talk about how we are facing the giants in our life and how we are relying on God for the victory. I'll see you on the Wednesday, and then I'll see you on Sunday. Blessings.